In suburban Minneapolis, a 72-year-old grandmother was about to wage digital warfare. What started as a family dinner took a shocking turn when her grandchildren dismissed her as useless online. Dolores Dolly Hendrickson wasn't your typical retiree. For 37 years, she had been a head librarian, known for her methodical precision and determination. When she encountered Madison's cruel mockery, she had no idea she was walking into dangerous territory. Dolly's wounded pride would lead to a cyber crusade exposing her grandchildren's darkest secrets. What began as seeking relevance would become vigilante justice. The quiet suburb would never recover. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The snow fell against the kitchen window like accusations, silent, persistent, covering everything in cold white judgment. Dolly Hendrickson stirred the pot roast one final time. The familiar weight of the wooden spoon in her arthritic fingers, a small comfort against the growing tension that filled her home, like smoke. "Dinner's ready," she called, though she knew her family was already gathered in the dining room, their faces lit by the blue glow of their phones rather than the warm light of the chandelier Harold had installed 30 years ago. The same chandelier she'd polished just this morning, hoping tonight might be different. Jennifer looked up briefly as Dolly carried the steaming platter to the table, her exhaustion evident in the dark circles under her eyes. At 45, Dolly's daughter carried herself like someone perpetually braced for the next crisis. 2 jobs and 2 teenagers had carved premature lines around her mouth, lines that deepened when she spotted Tyler's earbuds still firmly in place. "Tyler, earbuds out, we're eating." Jennifer's voice held the weary authority of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. Madison didn't even pretend to put her phone down. At 17, she'd perfected the art of appearing present while being completely elsewhere. Her perfectly manicured fingers, courtesy of the part-time job at the nail salon that Dolly had helped, her scrolled through endless feeds of carefully curated lives. "This smells amazing, Mom," Jennifer said, attempting to inject some warmth into the gathering. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." But Dolly had gone to all this trouble. The pot roast had been Harold's favorite, and cooking it felt like keeping a piece of him alive in this house that had grown too quiet, too empty since his heart attack 6 months ago. She'd spent the afternoon preparing Harold's mother's recipe, the one that required browning the meat just so and letting the vegetables simmer until they released their sweetness into the rich gravy. "It's no trouble," Dolly said, settling into her chair at the head of the table. Harold's old spot. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. "I enjoy cooking for family." Tyler finally removed his earbuds, though his eyes kept drifting to his phone beside his plate. At 15, he occupied that awkward space between childhood and adulthood, all gangly limbs and nervous energy. Unlike his sister, he at least attempted politeness around his grandmother. "Thanks, Grandma. It looks really good." Madison's snort was barely audible, but Dolly caught it. She always caught everything, even when her family thought she was too old, too out of touch to understand their subtle cruelties. They ate in relative silence for several minutes, the only sounds the scraping of silverware against china and the muffled howl of wind outside. Dolly had hoped the familiar ritual of a shared meal might bridge the growing distance between them, but the silence felt more like a chasm. "So," Dolly ventured, desperate to connect, "what's everyone been up to online today? Tyler, how's your gaming going?" Tyler's fork paused midway to his mouth. His gaming wasn't just a hobby. Dolly knew from Jennifer's complaints that it was becoming an obsession. But she was trying to show interest, trying to understand the digital world that seemed to consume her grandchildren's every waking moment. "It's fine, Grandma." Tyler's discomfort was obvious. "Just, gaming stuff." Madison looked up from her phone for the first time since sitting down, her perfectly lined eyes narrowing with something that looked like amusement. "Grandma, you don't even know what gaming means. It's not like the solitaire you play on your tablet." "Madison, Jennifer's warning carried no real authority. What? I'm just saying. Madison's voice took on the particular tone of condescension that teenagers wielded like weapons. It's cute that she tries, but there's a whole world online that older people just don't get. Dolly felt the familiar flush of humiliation creep up her neck. She'd been a librarian for 37 years before retiring. She'd taught herself to use computers when the library system went digital in the 90s. She wasn't some technophobic relic, despite what her granddaughter seemed to think. I understand more than you might think, Dolly said carefully. I've been using computers since before you were born. Madison's laugh was sharp, cutting. Grandma, checking email and playing solitaire isn't the same as actually being online. You don't understand social media, or influencers, or any of the stuff that actually matters now. Madison, that's enough. But Jennifer's protest was half-hearted, distracted. Her own phone had buzzed, and Dolly watched her daughter's attention fracture yet again. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly wanting to defend his grandmother, but lacking the courage to stand up to his sister. Madison had always been the dominant sibling, using her 3-year age advantage and sharp tongue to maintain control. I'm just being honest, Madison continued, emboldened by her mother's divided attention. It's like when old people try to use slang. It's embarrassing. You're just useless online, Grandma. And that's okay. You don't need to understand our world. The word useless hit Dolly like a physical blow. Useless. That's what she was. To them, a relic from another time. Someone to be tolerated and managed rather than valued or respected. Someone whose opinions didn't matter, whose presence was more burden than blessing. Jennifer finally looked up from her phone, registering the hurt on her mother's face. Madison, apologize to your grandmother. For what? For telling the truth? For being disrespectful. But the damage was done. Dolly could see it in Jennifer's eyes. The calculation, the way her daughter was weighing whether defending her mother was worth the fight with Madison. And in that moment of hesitation, Dolly had her answer. It's fine, Dolly said quietly, standing to clear her barely touched plate. Madison's entitled to her opinion. Jennifer's relief was palpable. Mom, you don't have to. I said it's fine. Dolly carried her plate to the kitchen, listening to the immediate resumption of conversation at the table. Lighter now, relieved, of the tension her presence had apparently created. She could hear Madison's voice, bright and animated as she told her mother about some social media drama, Tyler chiming in with occasional comments. They were a family when she wasn't there. Her presence made them smaller, more constrained. She stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the snow-covered yard, and tried to remember the last time any of them had asked her opinion about something that mattered. Not about dinner plans or whether Tyler needed a haircut, but about something real, something important. The answer came to her with startling clarity. Never. Not since Harold died. Maybe not even before that. Behind her, she could hear them laughing about something on Madison's phone. Their voices carried the easy intimacy of people who spoke the same language, understood the same references, lived in the same world. A world where Dolly was, as Madison had so succinctly put it, useless. She began washing dishes, the warm water, a small comfort against her cold hands. Through the window, she could see her neighbor Marcus Thompson clearing the snow from her driveway with his snowblower. He did that sometimes. Cleared her driveway without being asked, never making a big deal about it. Harold would have liked that about him. By the time Dolly finished cleaning up, her family had migrated to the living room, each absorbed in their individual screens. Tyler had his gaming headset on, Madison was live-streaming something on her phone, and Jennifer was hunched over her laptop, probably working on the accounting that never seemed to end. I'm going to say goodnight, Dolly announced to the room. 3 distracted acknowledgments floated back to her, none of them looking up. Dolly climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Harold's bedroom, their bedroom for 50 years until it became just hers. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her reflection in the dresser mirror, a 72-year-old woman with silver hair and Harold's eyes, staring back at someone who felt invisible. But as she prepared for bed, something hardened inside her chest, a resolve that felt unfamiliar and dangerous. Madison thought she was useless online, did she? Thought she didn't understand their world? Dolly had learned to use library databases. In the 80s, had taught computer literacy classes to senior citizens, had even helped Harold set up his first email account before he died. She wasn't some helpless old woman who needed to be managed and patronized. Maybe it was time to prove that. The snow continued to fall outside her window, and in the distance, she could hear Marcus's snowblower moving methodically up and down the street. Some people, it seemed, still understood the value of quiet service, of looking out for others without fanfare or recognition. Tomorrow, she decided, she would thank Marcus for clearing her driveway. And maybe, just maybe, she would ask him about more than snow removal. After all, retirement wasn't supposed to mean irrelevance. And if her family thought she was too old to learn new tricks, well, they were about to discover just how wrong they could be. Marcus's hand gripped the snow shovel handle as he cleared the last section of Dolly's driveway. The morning air bit at his cheeks, but the physical work felt good, purposeful in a way that retirement rarely provided. He'd noticed her watching from the kitchen window yesterday evening, her silhouette framed by warm light while her family's voices carried through the walls in animated conversation. When the front door opened, he straightened, brushing snow from his gloves. "Marcus, you didn't have to do this again." Dolly stepped onto the porch, wrapping her cardigan tighter against the February cold. "I could have managed." "I know you could have." He leaned the shovel against her garage. "But I was already out here with the snowblower. No sense letting you struggle with this when I can handle it in 5 minutes." Something in her expression made him pause. In the year since he'd moved next door, he'd learned to read Dolly's moods. She had the bearing of someone accustomed to competence, to being needed. But this morning, she looked fragile in a way that had nothing to do with age. "Coffee?" she asked. "I was just making a fresh pot." He'd never been inside her house before. Their interactions had been limited to driveway conversations and the occasional borrowed tool. But the invitation felt like more than politeness. "That sounds good." Her kitchen was warm and lived in, with the kind of organized comfort that spoke of decades of daily routines. Family photos covered the refrigerator, graduation pictures, vacation snapshots, the gradual accumulation of a life well lived. She poured coffee into mismatched mugs, her movements precise despite the slight tremor in her hands. "I wanted to ask you something," Dolly said, settling across from him at the small table. "About computers." Marcus had mentioned his background in IT during one of their conversations. 30 years with a telecommunications company before taking early retirement when Linda got sick. He'd kept busy with consulting work until her death 2 years ago, but lately, the days stretched long and empty. "What kind of help do you need?" "My grandchildren think I'm hopeless with technology." Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard before. "Last night, Madison told me I was useless online, that I don't understand their world." Marcus studied her face. Dolly Hendrickson had run the circulation department at the Minneapolis Public Library for nearly 4 decades. She'd navigated the transition from card catalogs to digital systems, had probably taught computer literacy classes to patrons who couldn't figure out email. Useless was the last word he'd used to describe her. "What exactly do you want to learn?" "Everything." The word came out sharper than she'd intended. "Social media, Instagram, all of it. I want to understand what they're doing online, how they spend their time. Maybe if I could connect with them in their space." She trailed off, but Marcus caught the subtext. This wasn't just about bridging generational gaps. This was about proving something. We could start simple, he offered. Facebook, maybe Twitter. Instagram's a bit more visual focused, but once you understand the basics. No. Dolly's interruption surprised them both. I want to understand it all. Really understand it. Not just how to post pictures, but how it works. Privacy settings, algorithms, how people find each other online. Marcus leaned back in his chair. She was asking for more than basic social media literacy. She wanted to understand the architecture of digital interaction, the hidden mechanics that most users never bothered to learn. That's actually pretty advanced stuff, Dolly. Most people just use these platforms without thinking about how they operate behind the scenes. I'm not most people. Her eyes met his. I spent my career helping people navigate information systems. I taught myself library databases in the 80s when half my colleagues were still using paper filing systems. I'm not some doddering old woman who can't figure out where the power button is. The hurt in her voice was unmistakable now. Whatever had happened last night had cut deeper than simple embarrassment. No, Marcus said quietly. You're definitely not that. They spent the next hour at her kitchen table, Marcus sketching out the basics of social media ecosystems on the back of an envelope. He explained usernames and profiles, friends and followers, the difference between public and private posts. Dolly listened with the focused attention of someone taking mental notes, asking questions that revealed her librarian's instinct for understanding systems and connections. So, privacy settings, she said. They're not just about who can see your posts. Right. They control who can find you, who can message you, what information shows up when people search for you. Most platforms have dozens of different privacy controls, but most users never touch them. And fake accounts? Marcus hesitated. What do you mean? Can someone create an account using a fake name? Fake information? Well, yes. The platforms have terms of service against it, but enforcement is pretty inconsistent. Why? Dolly didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked about profile pictures, about how friend requests worked, about the difference between public and private Instagram accounts. Her questions were getting more specific, more tactical. You know, Marcus said carefully, if you want to connect with your grandkids online, the easiest approach might be to just ask them to help you set up accounts. Most teenagers love showing off their digital knowledge. Dolly's laugh was bitter. Based on last night's conversation, I don't think they'd be interested in helping. What exactly happened? She told him about the dinner, about Madison's casual cruelty, and Jennifer's failure to intervene. As she spoke, Marcus began to understand the depth of her isolation. Here was a woman who'd spent her life helping others access information, now being dismissed as irrelevant by the people she loved most. They see me as this helpless old woman, Dolly said. Someone to be managed and patronized. But I'm not helpless, Marcus. I'm just out of practice. So you want to prove them wrong? I want to understand their world, really understand it. Not just enough to embarrass myself trying to fit in, but enough to... She paused, searching for the right words. Enough to be useful again. Marcus felt a familiar tug of recognition. The desire to matter, to contribute something meaningful rather than just existing on the margins. He'd felt it every day since Linda died, the slow erosion of purpose that came with having no one who needed you. I could teach you, he said. The advanced stuff, I mean. How to really navigate these platforms, understand how they work. But it would take time. I have time. And it might not solve the problem with your family. Sometimes the issue isn't technical knowledge. It's deeper than that. Dolly's expression hardened. Let me worry about my family. Right now, I just want to learn. Over the following days, Marcus found himself spending hours at Dolly's kitchen table, their coffee growing cold as they worked through the intricacies of digital identity. She was a remarkably quick study, absorbing information with the methodical precision he'd expected from a career librarian. She took notes in a small spiral notebook, organized by platform and function. They started with Facebook, basic profile creation, friend connections, the newsfeed algorithm. But Dolly's questions pushed deeper. How did Facebook decide which posts to show? How could you search for people without them knowing? What information was visible even on private profiles? By the third day, they'd moved to Instagram. Marcus showed her how to create accounts, how to find and follow other users, how the Explore page worked. Dolly practiced creating posts, understanding, hashtags, navigating direct messages. The privacy settings are more granular here, Marcus explained, clicking through menus. You can control who sees your posts, who can message you, whether your account shows up in search results. And if someone wanted to see another person's private posts, they'd have to send a follow request and be accepted. Unless what? Marcus hesitated. Unless they created a fake account that looked like someone the person might know, or found mutual friends to help gain access. But that would be deceptive. Dolly nodded, making another note in her spiral notebook. By the end of the week, she'd created practice accounts on multiple platforms. Marcus watched her navigate privacy settings with growing expertise, understanding the digital landscape with an intuition that surprised him. "You're really getting this," he said, as she successfully located Tyler's gaming profiles through cross-platform username searches. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "It's not that different from research," Dolly replied, her fingers moving confidently across the keyboard. "Finding connections, following threads of information. The tools are different, but the principles are the same." Marcus felt a flicker of unease as he watched her work. Dolly's interest had evolved beyond simple social media literacy. She was learning digital surveillance techniques, studying the methods people use to find and monitor others online. "Dolly," he said carefully, "what exactly are you planning to do with all this?" She looked up from the screen, her expression unreadable. "I told you. I want to understand their world." But as Marcus gathered his things to leave that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd taught her more than social media basics. He'd given her the tools to become invisible online, to create fictional identities, to access information that others thought was private. Standing on her front porch, watching her silhouette in the kitchen window as she continued working at the computer, Marcus wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Dolly Hendrickson was brilliant, determined, and recently dismissed by the people she loved most. That, he was beginning to realize, might be a dangerous combination. Standing on her front porch, watching Marcus's silhouette disappear into his own house, Dolly felt the weight of possibility settling around her like Harold's old winter coat, familiar yet transformative. She closed the door and returned to the kitchen table where her laptop waited, its screen still glowing with the Instagram interface Marcus had helped her navigate. The house felt different now that she was alone with her new knowledge. The silence that had oppressed her for months now seemed pregnant with potential. She opened her spiral notebook and reviewed the careful notes she'd taken over the past week. Privacy settings, search functions, fake account creation, all documented in her precise librarian's handwriting. Dolly created her first reconnaissance account at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in February. She chose the name Sarah M. and uploaded a stock photo of a smiling blonde woman in her 40s, generic enough to seem real, appealing enough to gain acceptance. Marcus had shown her how to reverse search images to ensure she wasn't stealing someone's actual photo. Tyler was easier to find than she'd expected. His gaming username Tyler H2009 appeared across multiple platforms, and his privacy settings were laughably inadequate. Within 20 minutes, she'd located his Twitch stream, his Discord servers, and his Instagram account that he thought was hidden from family. What she found there made her hands tremble against the keyboard. Tyler's Instagram stories revealed a desperate, anxious boy trying to project confidence he clearly didn't possess. Photos of expensive gaming equipment he couldn't afford, screenshots of high test scores that didn't match Jennifer's complaints about his grades, bragging posts about business ventures that made Dolly's stomach clench with recognition. She followed the digital breadcrumbs deeper. Tyler had accounts on platforms she'd never heard of. Discord servers dedicated to academic assistance, encrypted messaging apps, cryptocurrency wallets. The methodical part of her brain, honed by decades of research, began assembling the puzzle pieces. Her grandson was selling stolen test answers. The evidence was all there, hidden in plain sight among gaming posts and teenage bravado. Screenshots of upcoming exams, negotiations over payment methods, satisfied customer testimonials from classmates who'd purchased Tyler's study guides. He'd created an entire underground economy around academic fraud, using his mother's financial desperation and his own isolation to justify increasingly risky behavior. Dolly sat back in her chair, her coffee long cold. Tyler, her sweet, anxious grandson who still asked for extra hugs at bedtime, was a criminal. A small-time one, perhaps, but the potential consequences made her chest tight with fear. Suspension, expulsion, criminal charges for academic fraud, universities that would reject him, employers who would never hire him. But Tyler's transgressions paled compared to what she discovered about Madison. Finding Madison's accounts required more sophisticated techniques. Her granddaughter was social media savvy, with privacy settings that would have challenged most adults. But Marcus had taught Dolly to think like a digital detective, to find connections through mutual friends and cross-platform usernames. Madison had 7 different Instagram accounts. The first was her public persona, a Madison H. official, carefully curated photos showcasing a perfect teenage life. Artistic coffee shots, outfit of the day posts, inspirational quotes about following your dreams. The kind of content that garnered hundreds of likes and comments from classmates and acquaintances. The second account, linked through a hidden story highlight, was more revealing. Here, Madison posted about her struggles with body image, her frustration with her mother's financial stress, her anger at her father's abandonment. Still performative, but with an edge of genuine vulnerability that made Dolly's heart ache. The third account led Dolly into much darker territory. Serenity Dreams 18 featured photos that made Dolly's grandmother instincts scream in alarm. Madison, or someone pretending to be Madison, posed in lingerie, in suggestive positions, with captions that left no doubt about the intended audience. The follower count was small but intensely engaged, with comments that made Dolly's skin crawl. She spent the next hour documenting what she found, her librarian's training overriding her emotional response. Madison wasn't just posting provocative photos, she was running an elaborate catfishing operation. Multiple fake personas, each targeting different types of older men. Lonely widowers, unhappy husbands, wealthy executives seeking young company. The evidence was methodically organized in Madison's own digital files, which Dolly accessed through a fake Snapchat account that convinced Madison they were classmates from her old school. Screenshots of conversations, payment records through Venmo and Cash App, even a spreadsheet tracking which lies she'd told to which victims. Madison had received over $3,000 in the past 2 months. But the money wasn't the most frightening part. Madison was arranging to meet these men in person. Real meetings, with real strangers, in locations that made Dolly's hands shake as she typed. Hotel rooms, private apartments, secluded parking lots. Her 17-year-old granddaughter was walking into situations that could destroy her life, or end it entirely. The worst discovery came at 2:30 a.m., buried in Madison's encrypted messaging app. Plans to meet a 48-year-old businessman named Robert the following weekend. Madison had convinced him she was 19 and attending community college, using photos that were clearly professional headshots stolen from a modeling website. Robert believed he was paying for companionship, but Madison's messages suggested she was planning something far more elaborate and dangerous. Dolly closed the laptop and stared at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. In one night, she'd uncovered criminal activity that could destroy both her grandchildren's futures. Tyler's academic fraud was serious, but contained. Madison's behavior was a catastrophe waiting to happen. Her first instinct was to call Jennifer immediately, to demand a family meeting, to intervene with all the maternal authority she could muster. But Madison's words from dinner echoed in her mind. "You're just useless online, Grandma." Useless. They thought she was too old, too irrelevant to understand their problems, too incompetent to help. Madison had dismissed her concerns about internet safety as the paranoid ramblings of someone who didn't understand the modern world. But Dolly understood more than any of them realized. She understood that Tyler was headed for academic disaster, that Madison was walking into genuine danger, and that neither of them respected her enough to listen to warnings. She also understood something else, something that crystallized as she sat alone in her kitchen at 3 a.m, surrounded by the evidence of her family's deception. Knowledge was power, and for the first time in months, Dolly Hendrickson felt powerful. The question was what to do with that power. Direct. Confrontation had already failed spectacularly, but Marcus had taught her other options, other ways to influence behavior and expose truth. Dolly opened the laptop again and began creating her fourth fake account of the evening. This one would require more careful construction, more sophisticated planning. But if her grandchildren wanted to play adult games with adult consequences, perhaps it was time they learned what those consequences looked like. After all, she was just a useless old woman who didn't understand their world. She was just a useless old woman who didn't understand their world. Wasn't she? The morning after her digital revelation, Dolly sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee she couldn't taste and a resolve that felt like steel in her chest. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Madison's face. In those provocative photos, heard Tyler's nervous laugh when he'd claimed his gaming was just for fun. She'd spent the dark hours between 3 and dawn crafting her approach. Direct confrontation first. One last attempt at being the concerned grandmother they needed her to be. If that failed, well, she had other options now. Madison arrived for Sunday dinner alone, Tyler having claimed he was sick. Jennifer had dropped her daughter off with the weary expression of someone grateful for a few hours of peace. Dolly waited until they were settled in the living room, Madison's phone already commanding her attention. "Madison, I need to talk to you about something important." Her granddaughter didn't look up from her screen. "If this is about college applications again, Grandma, I told you I'm taking a gap year. It's about your online activities." That got Madison's attention. Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing with the particular suspicion teenagers reserved for adults who threatened their digital privacy. What about them? Dolly had rehearsed this conversation, choosing her words carefully. "I'm concerned about some of the people you're talking to online, older men who might not have your best interests at heart." Madison's laugh was sharp, dismissive. "Grandma, seriously? This is exactly what I meant about you not understanding. You can't just spy on people online. There are privacy settings for a reason. I'm not spying. I'm worried about your safety." "My safety?" Madison stood up, her voice rising with indignation. "You don't even know how to use Instagram, and you're worried about my safety? This is insane." "Madison, please. I know more than you think. About Robert, about the money transfers, about—" "Stop." The word came out like a slap. Madison's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I don't know what you think you know, but you need to back off. Right now." Dolly tried again, her voice gentle but firm. Sweetheart, what you're doing is dangerous. These men you're meeting. I'm not meeting anyone. Madison's denial was too quick, too desperate. And even if I was, it's none of your business? You're not my mother. No, but I love you, and I'm trying to protect me. Madison's voice turned vicious. From what? From finally having some control over my life? From not having to ask Mom for every little thing because Dad doesn't pay child support? From actually being worth something to somebody? The pain in her granddaughter's voice broke Dolly's heart, but Madison wasn't finished. You know what, Grandma? You want to know about my online life? Here's the truth. You're irrelevant. Completely and totally irrelevant. The world moved on without you, and you can't stand it. So you sit in this house and judge everyone else because you're too scared to admit that nobody needs you anymore. Madison grabbed her phone and jacket. And if you ever try to interfere in my life again, I'll have Mom put you in a home so fast your head will spin. Because that's where useless old ladies belong. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. Dolly sat in the sudden silence, Madison's words echoing like physical blows. Useless. Irrelevant. Ready for a home. The casual cruelty of youth, perhaps, but wielded with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage. She walked to her laptop and opened it with hands that no longer trembled. Madison thought she was powerless, did she? Thought she could threaten the woman who'd spent 4 decades helping people navigate complex information systems? Dolly's fingers moved across the keyboard with the methodical precision of someone who'd made up her mind. She accessed Tyler's digital files first, the safer target, the warning shot that would demonstrate her capabilities without causing irreparable harm. The email to Roosevelt High School's administration was carefully worded, sent from an anonymous account Marcus had unknowingly taught her to create. She attached screenshots of Tyler's Discord conversations about selling test answers, his Venmo transactions, and his boastful posts about academic fraud. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. She sent the email at 2:47 p.m. on a Sunday afternoon, knowing it would be discovered first thing Monday morning. The call came Tuesday evening. Dolly was preparing dinner when she heard Jennifer's car door slam with unusual force. Her daughter burst through the front door without knocking, her face red with exhaustion and fury. "Mom, we need to talk. Now!" Tyler followed behind her, his face streaked with tears, looking younger than his 15 years. The confident gamer persona had crumbled, revealing the scared, ashamed boy underneath. "Tyler's been suspended," Jennifer announced without preamble. "Academic probation, possible expulsion. They have evidence he's been selling test answers for months." Dolly arranged her expression into appropriate shock and concern. "Oh my goodness! Tyler, is this true?" "Someone sent the school screenshots of everything," Jennifer continued, collapsing into a kitchen chair. "Anonymous tip. They know about the money, the Discord servers, all of it." Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry. I just wanted to help Mom with money, and the kids at school were mean, and I thought if I could make some cash." The genuine remorse in his voice almost made Dolly regret her actions. Almost. "The school wants to see us tomorrow," Jennifer said. "They're talking about criminal charges, Tyler. Criminal charges for a 15-year-old. "Maybe this person was trying to help," Dolly suggested carefully. "Maybe they were concerned about Tyler and wanted the adults in his life to know what was happening." Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "Help? This has destroyed everything. Tyler's academic record, his college prospects, our family's reputation. Whoever did this has ruined his life." "No," Tyler said quietly. "I ruined my life. This person just made everyone else see it." Dolly reached across the table and took her grandson's hand. The skin was soft, still carrying traces of childhood despite his height and deepening voice. "Sometimes," she said, People have to face consequences for their choices. That's how they learn to make better ones. Jennifer was too exhausted to notice the subtle emphasis in her mother's words, but Tyler looked up with something that might have been recognition flickering in his eyes. Marcus appeared at the back door around 9, carrying a casserole from his freezer and wearing the concerned expression of a neighbor who'd noticed unusual activity. "Everything all right over here?" Saw Jennifer's car and thought maybe. "Family crisis," Dolly explained, accepting the casserole. "Tyler's gotten himself into some trouble at school." Marcus's eyes moved between Tyler's tear-stained face and Jennifer's defeated posture. "Anything I can do to help?" "Actually," Dolly said, "could you walk me through some of those privacy settings you showed me? I want to make sure Tyler understands how digital footprints work, how easy it is for people to find information online." The question was innocent enough, but Marcus's expression grew troubled as he looked at Dolly's calm face. There was something in her tone, a satisfaction that hadn't been there during their lesson. "Dolly," he said carefully, "you didn't—" "I'm just a concerned grandmother," she replied smoothly. "Trying to understand my grandchildren's world, remember?" But as Marcus helped Jennifer and Tyler understand the technical aspects of digital privacy, he couldn't shake the feeling that Dolly understood far more than any of them realized, and that Tyler's suspension might not be the random act of an anonymous tipster, but the calculated move of someone who'd learned his lessons all too well. Standing in Dolly's kitchen, watching her comfort her devastated grandson with one hand, while her laptop remained open on the counter, Marcus realized he'd created something he didn't recognize, something that looked like justice from one angle and revenge from another. The question was, what would she do next? The satisfaction from Tyler's suspension lasted exactly 3 days. Dolly had expected to feel vindicated, triumphant even, watching her family scramble to address the consequences of secrets she'd exposed. Instead, she found herself staring at her computer screen at 2 a.m, the blue light casting harsh shadows across her face as she scrolled through Madison's Instagram posts. Her granddaughter's carefully curated life smiled back at her from dozens of photos, beach vacations that never happened, designer clothes purchased with money from lonely men, a fabricated existence built on calculated deception. Each post garnered hundreds of likes and comments from classmates who had no idea they were admiring a mirage. Tyler's punishment had been swift and decisive, clean, almost surgical in its precision. But Madison required a different approach entirely. Dolly opened a new browser window and logged into the first of her anonymous accounts, iTruthSeeker 2024, created with Marcus's unwitting guidance 3 weeks ago. The profile featured a stock photo of a concerned middle-aged woman and a bio that read, "Protecting our children from online predators." She began with Robert Hutchins, a 52-year-old insurance adjuster from Des Moines who'd been sending Madison gifts for 6 months. Madison had crafted an elaborate story about being a college freshman studying art therapy, complete with fictional financial struggles that tugged at his paternal instincts. The Amazon packages arriving at Ashley Johnson's house, Madison was too smart to use her own address, had grown increasingly expensive. Dolly typed carefully, her librarian's precision evident in every word. "Mr. Hutchins, you don't know me, but I believe you've been corresponding with my niece, Madison Hendrickson. I think you should know that Emma is actually a 17-year-old high school student who has been using fake photos and a fabricated identity to manipulate you. I'm attaching screenshots of her real social media accounts. Please stop sending money and gifts to this child." She attached Madison's real Instagram photos, her school roster listing, and most damning of all, screenshots of Madison bragging to Ashley about her pathetic old men who were so easy to manipulate. Send. The next victim was David Chen, a recently divorced software engineer who'd been pouring his loneliness into conversations with Madison's fictional persona, Sophia, supposedly a 19-year-old nursing student. Dolly crafted a similar message, this time including screenshots of Madison mocking his poetry and his attempts at romantic overtures. Send. Then came Harold Morrison. The irony of the name wasn't lost on her. A widower whose wife had died. Just 18 months ago. Madison had been particularly cruel in exploiting his grief, creating an elaborate backstory about losing her own grandmother to cancer. Dolly's fingers trembled as she typed this message, thinking of Harold's genuine kindness, his real loss, being perverted for a teenager's entertainment. Send. By 4 a.m, she'd contacted all 12 men she'd identified in Madison's scheme. But as she prepared to close her laptop, something cold settled in her chest. Exposure wasn't enough. These men would likely retreat, embarrassed and hurt, but Madison would simply create new identities, find new victims. She needed to ensure the lesson stuck. Dolly opened Twitter and created another account, Minneapolis Watch, then Facebook, Sarah Davidson, concerned parent, Instagram, iTeen Safety Net. Each account used different photos, different biographical details, but all served the same purpose. She began with Madison's school, a concerned message to the principal about a student engaged in potentially illegal catfishing activities, screenshots of conversations, evidence of fraud, documentation of the money and gifts received under false pretenses. Then the local community Facebook groups, Maple Grove Parents Network, Minneapolis Teen Safety Coalition, North Metro Community Watch. Each post carefully crafted to seem like a concerned parent sharing a cautionary tale. Please talk to your teens about the dangers of online predators and about becoming predators themselves. A local student has been catfishing older men for money and gifts, putting herself and potentially other students at risk. She included enough identifying information to make Madison recognizable without being explicitly libelous. The high school's name, the general neighborhood, physical descriptions that anyone at Jefferson High would recognize. The responses came within hours. Concerned parents sharing the posts, school officials promising investigation, other students beginning to connect the dots. But it was Twitter where things truly spiraled beyond her control. Someone had screenshot her posts and shared them with Madison's real name attached. Another user had found Madison's actual Instagram account and began commenting on every photo. Is this the catfish girl? How many old men are you scamming? By noon, Chucker Catfish Madison was trending in Minneapolis social media circles. Dolly watched from her kitchen table, coffee growing cold in her cup, as her carefully planned exposure transformed into something viral and vicious. Students from Madison's school began sharing their own stories, rumors about Madison's expensive clothes, her mysterious money, her arrogant attitude. The narrative shifted from concerned warning to gleeful takedown. Someone created a fake account using Madison's real photos and began messaging random men on dating apps with deliberately ridiculous pickup lines. Others started a Reddit thread documenting every expensive item Madison had ever posted, trying to calculate her total earnings from the scheme. Her phone rang. Jennifer's name on the caller ID. Mom. Jennifer's voice was strained, barely controlled. Did you see what's happening online? Someone's posting about Madison, saying terrible things. The whole school is talking about it. Dolly's hand tightened on the phone. What kind of things? They're calling her a scammer. A catfish. There are screenshots of conversations, photos of her with some of her expensive things. The principal called me into school. They're starting an investigation. Through Jennifer's voice, Dolly could hear Madison crying in the background, harsh, desperate sobs that cut through her satisfaction like broken glass. Where did this come from? Jennifer continued. Who would do this to her? Dolly closed her laptop with deliberate care. On the screen, notifications continued to flash. Shares, comments, reactions to posts that had taken on a life of their own. I don't know, she said quietly. But maybe now she'll understand how it feels to have her private life exposed for everyone to judge. The line went silent except for Madison's continued sobbing. "Mom." Jennifer's voice was deadly quiet. "Now. That almost sounded like you think she deserved this." Dolly looked out her kitchen window toward Marcus's house, where she could see him working in his garden, oblivious to the digital wildfire she'd started. Didn't she? The question hung in the air between them like smoke, acrid and impossible to ignore. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived at Dolly's front door at exactly 9:15 the next morning, her badge gleaming against the backdrop of melting snow. Through the peephole, Dolly could see a woman about Jennifer's age with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that had seen too much of human nature's darker impulses. "Mrs. Hendrickson? I'm Detective Mitchell with Minneapolis, PD. I'd like to speak with you about some online harassment complaints we've received." Dolly's coffee cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. She'd been expecting this, had even rehearsed what she might say, but the reality of a police officer on her doorstep made her chest tighten with something between guilt and defiance. "Of course, please come in." Detective Mitchell moved through Dolly's living room with the careful observation of someone trained to notice details. Her eyes lingered on the family photos covering the mantel: Jennifer's graduation, the grandchildren as toddlers, Harold in his military uniform from 50 years ago. "Nice family," Mitchell said, settling into Harold's old chair. "They are." Dolly perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "Though I suspect you're not here to admire my photographs." "No, ma'am. We've received several complaints about coordinated online harassment targeting a minor, Madison Hendrickson." Mitchell pulled out a tablet, swiping through what appeared to be screenshots. "The complainant is Jennifer Hendrickson Walsh. I believe she's your daughter?" "She is." Dolly's voice remained steady, though her pulse quickened. "And Madison is my granddaughter." "Then you're aware of what's been happening to her online?" "I'm aware that Madison's been exposed for some very troubling behavior." Dolly lifted her chin slightly. "Catfishing older men, taking their money under false pretenses. Surely that's more concerning than people talking about it." Detective Mitchell leaned forward, her expression patient but focused. "Mrs. Hendrickson, regardless of Madison's actions, what's happening to her now constitutes cyber harassment. Multiple fake accounts coordinating to humiliate and threaten a minor. That's a crime." Before Dolly could respond, her front door burst open without ceremony. Brian Walsh strode in like he still lived there, his expensive suit slightly wrinkled and his tie askew. The uniform of a man trying to project control while everything around him crumbled. "Dolly, we need to talk." He stopped short when he saw Detective Mitchell. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Brian." Dolly's voice carried decades of restrained dislike. "Detective Mitchell, this is Brian Walsh, Jennifer's ex-husband." "Mr. Walsh." Mitchell stood, extending her hand. "Actually, your timing is convenient. I'll need to speak with the whole family." "About what?" Brian's lawyer instincts kicked, in his posture shifting to defensive. "The online harassment campaign against your daughter." Brian's face darkened. "You mean someone's finally doing something about this? It's been going on for days. Madison's been getting death threats. For Christ's sake, she won't even leave her room." "Death threats?" Dolly felt something cold settle in her stomach. Mitchell nodded grimly. "The situation escalated significantly overnight. Someone doxed Madison's home address. There have been threats of physical violence, suggestions that she should kill herself, pizza deliveries to harass the family, fake emergency calls. That's not..." Dolly began, then caught herself. "I mean, that's terrible, of course." "Where's Jennifer now?" Brian demanded, as if Dolly were responsible for keeping track of his ex-wife's schedule. "At home with Madison. The school suggested she stay home today for her own safety." Mitchell turned back to Dolly. Mrs. Hendrickson, I need to ask you directly. Do you have any involvement in the social media posts about your granddaughter? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and inescapable. Dolly looked at the family photos on her mantle. Madison as a gap-toothed 7-year-old, hugging Harold's neck with sticky fingers. Tyler at his 8th grade graduation, grinning proudly in his too-big suit. I think, she said carefully, that Madison needed to face consequences for her actions. That's not what I asked. Brian stepped closer, his face flushing red. Jesus Christ, Dolly. Tell me you didn't do this. Tell me you didn't destroy my daughter because you were angry about some stupid family dinner. Your daughter? Dolly's. Composure cracked. Where were you when Madison was catfishing strangers? Where were you when Tyler was selling test answers? You abandoned this family the moment a younger woman smiled at you, and now you want to play concerned father? That has nothing to do with— It has everything to do with it. Dolly stood, her small frame vibrating with fury. You left Jennifer to raise 2 children alone while working 60 hours a week. You left me to watch them make increasingly dangerous choices because their mother was too exhausted to notice, and their father was too selfish to care. Detective Mitchell held up a hand. Let's keep this focused. Mrs. Hendrickson, did you create fake social media accounts to post about Madison? The weight of the question settled over her like a burial shroud. Through the window, she could see Marcus working in his yard, pruning his rose bushes with the same methodical care he'd once used to teach her about privacy settings and anonymous accounts. Sweet, patient Marcus, who'd thought he was helping. A lonely widow connect with her family. Yes, she said quietly. I did. Brian's face went white. You vindictive old bitch. Do you have any idea what you've done? Brian. Detective Mitchell's voice carried a sharp warning. No, let him finish, Dolly said, her voice gaining strength. I'd like to hear what kind of man calls his children's grandmother a bitch while his daughter is upstairs crying because her lies finally caught up with her. Her lies? Brian's voice cracked. Dolly, she's 17 years old. She made mistakes, yes, but you tried to destroy her life out of spite. I tried to protect those men she was manipulating. I tried to make her understand that actions have consequences. Dolly looked directly at Detective Mitchell. Madison hurt people, real people with real feelings. She took their money, their trust, their hope, and she laughed about it. So you decided to become judge and jury? Mitchell asked. I decided to tell the truth. You decided to get revenge, Brian snapped. And now my daughter is getting death threats from strangers on the internet. The words hit Dolly like a physical blow. Death threats. She'd wanted Madison to feel embarrassed, exposed, humbled. She'd wanted her to understand how it felt to be dismissed and mocked. She hadn't wanted her to fear for her life. I never intended for it to go that far, she whispered. But you started it, Mitchell said. And once something goes viral online, Mrs. Hendrickson, you lose all control over where it goes. Through the window, Dolly watched Marcus look toward her house, his expression troubled. Even from this distance, she could see the confusion in his posture, the way he kept glancing toward her door as if trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite understand. She thought of his kind eyes, his patient explanations, his gentle assumption that she wanted to learn technology to connect with her family, not to destroy them. I need to speak with Tyler, she said suddenly. Tyler? Brian frowned. What does Tyler have to do with this? But Detective Mitchell was already nodding, understanding flickering in her eyes. He figured it out, didn't he? Your grandson put the pieces together. Dolly closed her eyes, remembering Tyler's face 3 days ago when his school suspension was announced. The way he'd looked at her across the dinner table. Not with surprise, but with a terrible, dawning comprehension. Tyler's always been the smart one, she said softly. He sees things others miss. And somewhere across town, In a house where Madison cried behind locked doors and Jennifer paced the floors trying to hold her fractured family together, Tyler Hendrickson sat with a burden of knowledge that was about to tear what remained of their world apart. The confrontation came that evening, in Dolly's living room that had witnessed 47 years of family gatherings, arguments, celebrations, and quiet conversations. But nothing quite like this. Jennifer sat rigid on the sofa, her face pale except for 2 bright spots of color high on her cheekbones. Tyler hunched in the corner chair, his usual teenage slouch replaced by the careful posture of someone trying to make himself invisible. Madison wasn't there. She'd refused to leave her room, where she'd been barricaded since the death threats started arriving in her DMs. Brian paced behind the sofa like a caged animal, his expensive shoes clicking against Harold's hardwood floors. And Marcus sat beside Dolly, his weathered hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Say it again." Jennifer's voice was barely above a whisper. "I want to hear you say it again, Mom." Dolly straightened her shoulders, meeting her daughter's eyes. "I created fake accounts to expose Madison's catfishing operation. I contacted her victims. I posted warnings on social media about her behavior." "Jesus Christ!" Brian stopped pacing, whirling to face her. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Madison hasn't eaten in 2 days. She's getting messages telling her to kill herself. Someone posted our address online with suggestions about what they'd like to do to her." "That wasn't my intention?" "Your intention?" Jennifer's voice cracked. "Your intention was to publicly humiliate my 17-year-old daughter because she hurt your feelings at dinner?" "Your 17-year-old daughter was committing fraud." Dolly's own voice rose, decades of maternal authority flooding back. She was manipulating vulnerable men, taking their money, laughing about their loneliness. Where was your concern then? "She's a child, Mom. A stupid, cruel child who made terrible choices, but still a child." Jennifer's hands shook as she pressed them against her temples. "You're supposed to be the adult here." Marcus cleared his throat quietly. "Dolly, maybe we should—" "No." Tyler's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned to look at him, surprised by the strength in his normally quiet tone. Let her finish. Let Grandma explain why she thought destroying Madison was more important than protecting her. "I was protecting people," Dolly said, but her voice lacked conviction now. "Those men Madison was hurting." "Were you?" Tyler stood up, his 15-year-old frame seeming suddenly older, more substantial. "Or were you just angry that Madison called you irrelevant?" The words hit like a slap. Dolly felt her carefully constructed justifications crumbling under her grandson's steady gaze. "Tyler," Jennifer warned, but he ignored her. "I figured it out 3 days ago, when I got suspended. The timing was too perfect. The anonymous tip about my test selling came right after our family dinner, right after Madison was mean to you." Tyler's voice gained strength as he spoke. "And then, when the Madison stuff started happening, I knew." "You knew and you didn't say anything?" Brian demanded. "I hoped I was wrong." Tyler looked directly at Dolly. "I hoped my grandmother wasn't capable of something this cruel." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and the distant sound of Madison's muffled sobs from upstairs. "She needed to learn," Dolly began. "She needed help," Jennifer exploded, finally finding her voice. "She needed therapy, intervention, consequences, yes, but not public. Destruction by her own grandmother." "You wouldn't have done anything," Dolly shot back. "You never do anything except work and check your phone and assume everything will work itself out." "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you had a real conversation with Madison about her behavior? When was the last time you noticed Tyler was struggling? You're so busy being overwhelmed that you've checked out of actually parenting." Jennifer's face went white. "How dare you—" I dare because someone had to. Someone had to care enough to pay attention, to see what was really happening with these children. By destroying them? Marcus's voice was quiet but filled with horror. Dolly, what you did to Madison, that's not caring. That's revenge. The accusation from Marcus hit harder than all the others combined. Dolly turned to look at him, seeing the pain and disappointment in his eyes, the way he was pulling away from her both physically and emotionally. I taught you those techniques so you could connect with your family, he continued, his voice heavy with guilt. I never imagined you'd use them to hurt people. I was trying to help. No. Tyler's voice cut through her explanation. You were trying to prove Madison wrong. You wanted to show her that you weren't useless, that you could be just as cruel and cutting as she was. The truth of it settled over the room like smoke, acrid and inescapable. And now, Jennifer said, her voice breaking, my daughter is upstairs with a bottle of her antidepressants, and I'm terrified to leave her alone. The words hit Dolly like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean she's talking about ending it all, Mom. She says everyone hates her, that her life is ruined, that she'll never be able to show her face at school again. Jennifer's tears finally came, silent streams down her cheeks. My baby is talking about killing herself, and it's because her grandmother decided to teach her a lesson. The room spun slightly around Dolly. She gripped the arm of her chair, feeling suddenly fragile, suddenly old in a way that had nothing to do with her 72 years. I never meant, she whispered. But you did it anyway, Tyler said, quietly. You meant every post, every message, every account you created. You just didn't think about what would happen after. From upstairs came the sound of a door slamming, followed by Jennifer's sharp intake of breath. Madison, she called, already moving toward the stairs. But it was too late. They all heard it, the bathroom door locking, the sound of the medicine, cabinet opening, and then Jennifer's scream of pure terror as she realized what her daughter was about to do. The fluorescent lights in Minneapolis General's psychiatric ward cast everything in harsh, unforgiving detail. Madison had been unconscious for 18 hours after the paramedics pumped her stomach, and now lay pale and fragile in the narrow hospital bed, looking younger than her 17 years. Dolly sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair beside the window, watching her granddaughter's chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. The tubes and wires seemed to mock her, technology designed to preserve life, while the technology she'd wielded had nearly destroyed it. Mrs. Hendrickson? Detective Mitchell appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral. Could I speak with you privately? They walked to a small conference room down the hall, where Mitchell spread out printed screenshots across the scratched table like evidence in a murder trial. Which, Dolly supposed, it nearly had been. I've been investigating the harassment campaign against your granddaughter, Mitchell began. What I've found is extensive. The screenshots showed the progression of Dolly's campaign, from her initial targeted messages to Madison's victims, to the broader social media posts, to the viral explosion that had spiraled beyond anyone's control. Each image was time-stamped, traced back to IP addresses, documented with the methodical precision of a criminal investigation. The initial posts came from accounts created on your home internet connection, Mitchell continued. But what's interesting is how quickly it spread beyond your control. Within 12 hours, there were dozens of copycat accounts, harassment from complete strangers, doxing attempts from people who had never heard of Madison before that day. Dolly studied the screenshots, seeing her careful, targeted campaign transformed into something monstrous and unrecognizable. I never asked anyone else to join in. No, but you started something you couldn't stop. That's the nature of viral content, Mrs. Hendrickson. Once it reaches critical mass, it develops its own momentum. What happens now? Mitchell leaned back in her chair. That depends on several factors. Madison's condition, obviously. Whether Your daughter wants to press charges. Whether any of Madison's victims decide to pursue legal action for the harassment they received. What kind of charges? Cyberstalking, harassment of a minor, potentially fraud, depending on how the fake accounts were used. Mitchell's tone remained professional, but there was something else there. Not quite sympathy, but understanding. Mrs. Hendrickson, can I ask you something off the record? Dolly nodded. Do you have children of your own? Jennifer. I mean other children, particularly sons. The question caught Dolly off guard. No. Just Jennifer. Why? I'm trying to understand your mindset. Most grandmothers, when they discover their grandchildren are in trouble, try to protect them. Even when they're angry, even when they feel betrayed. You chose to expose them instead. Dolly was quiet for a long moment, staring at the screenshots of her handiwork. When I was Madison's age, if I'd behaved the way she was behaving, my grandmother would have taken a switch to me. There would have been consequences, real, immediate consequences. But you didn't take a switch to Madison. You took the internet to her. I wanted her to understand. What? That actions have consequences? Or that you weren't as helpless as she thought? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and inescapable. Down the hall, Jennifer was meeting with Dr. Sarah Kim, Madison's psychiatrist. The conversation was taking place in another sterile room, filled with the same harsh lighting and uncomfortable furniture that seemed designed to strip away any pretense or comfort. Madison is stable, physically, Dr. Kim was saying, but she's experiencing severe depression, anxiety, and what appears to be trauma-related symptoms from the online harassment. Trauma? Jennifer's voice was hoarse from crying and lack of sleep. The viral nature of the attack, the public humiliation, the death threats, these can have lasting psychological effects, particularly on adolescents whose sense of identity is still developing. Jennifer pressed her hands against her temples. How long? How long will she need to stay here? That depends on her progress. Right now, she's refusing to speak to anyone except to say she wants to die. We need to work through the immediate crisis before we can address the underlying issues. What underlying issues? Dr. Kim consulted her notes. Madison's behavior prior to this incident suggests some concerning patterns. The catfishing, the need for external validation, the elaborate deceptions. These often stem from deeper insecurities and self-worth issues. Are you saying this is my fault? That I failed as a mother? I'm saying that Madison was struggling before this happened. The online harassment was a trigger, not the root cause. Dr. Kim's voice was gentle but firm. We need to understand what drove her to seek validation from strangers online, what made her feel the need to create false identities. Meanwhile, in the hospital cafeteria, Tyler sat across from Ashley Johnson, both of them picking at sandwiches neither wanted to eat. Ashley had arrived that morning with a shoebox full of printed screenshots, text messages, and photos, evidence she'd been collecting for months. I knew this would happen eventually, Ashley said quietly. Not exactly this, but something. Madison was getting more reckless, more cruel about the guys she was scamming. Why didn't you stop her? Ashley looked up, her eyes red with exhaustion and guilt. I tried to talk to her, but Madison doesn't listen when she doesn't want to hear something. And I was. She paused, struggling with the admission. I was scared of her, Tyler. Scared of what she might do to me if I crossed her. What do you mean? Madison knows things about everyone. Secrets, embarrassing stories, mistakes people have made. She collects them like insurance, policies. Anyone who gets in her way gets destroyed. Tyler felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kinds of things does she know about you? Things I did when I was younger. Stupid things, but things that would ruin my reputation at school if they got out. Ashley pushed her sandwich away, untouched. That's how she kept me in line. How she kept everyone in line. So you documented everything? My dad's a lawyer. He taught me to always keep records, especially when dealing with people who might hurt you. Ashley gestured toward the shoebox. I never meant for it to be used like this, but when the harassment started, when Madison ended up here, Detective Mitchell needs to understand the whole picture. Back in Madison's room, Marcus sat beside Dolly, both of them maintaining a vigil that felt more like a wake. The machines beeped steadily, marking time in a space where time seemed suspended. I keep thinking about Sarah, Marcus said quietly, referring to his late wife. How she used to say that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling. Madison needed boundaries. Yes, but this wasn't about boundaries, Dolly. This was about punishment. Dolly looked at her granddaughter's pale face, the dark circles under her eyes visible even in sleep. I wanted to protect her. From what? From becoming someone who could hurt people without consequences. From thinking she could manipulate and deceive and face no repercussions. And instead, you taught her that the people who are supposed to love her most are the ones most likely to destroy her. The words hit like a physical blow. Dolly felt tears coming, the first real tears. She'd allowed herself since this whole nightmare began. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of Madison's chest. Maybe, he said finally. The first step is admitting that some things can't be fixed. Some damage is permanent. And maybe that's a lesson we all need to learn. Outside Madison's window, Minneapolis continued its daily routine, oblivious to the family destroying itself one revelation at a time. And in the bed between them, a 17-year-old girl slept, the heavy sleep of the sedated, dreaming dreams that no one would ever know. 3 weeks later, Dolly stood before Judge Patricia Reeves in Hennepin County District Court, her hands clasped tightly behind her back as the charges were read aloud. Cyberstalking, harassment of a minor, criminal defamation. Each word fell, like a gavel, marking the end of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. Mrs. Hendrickson, Judge Reeves said, her voice carrying the weight of 30 years on the bench. I've read the victim impact statements, the psychiatric evaluations, and the evidence presented by both the prosecution and defense. This is an unusual case, to say the least. In the gallery behind her, Dolly could feel the weight of eyes watching, Jennifer's, Tyler's, even Marcus's, though he sat in the back row like a stranger. Madison wasn't there. She'd been released from the hospital after a week, but had refused to leave her room since, communicating only through written notes and therapy sessions that Jennifer attended like a penance. The prosecution has recommended 6 months in county jail, followed by 2 years of probation and mandatory counseling, Judge Reeves continued. The defense has argued for community service and restitution. What I'm struggling with, Mrs. Hendrickson, is understanding how a 72-year-old grandmother became a cyberbully. Dolly's lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named David, Chen, the irony of the name wasn't lost on her, had advised her to remain silent except when directly asked to speak. But standing in this courtroom, facing the consequences of choices that had seemed so justified 3 weeks ago, Dolly felt compelled to try one more time to make someone understand. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Reeves nodded. Briefly. I never intended for Madison to be hurt. I intended for her to face consequences for hurting others. Dolly's voice was steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. She was manipulating vulnerable men, taking their money, mocking their loneliness. Someone needed to stop her. And you felt that someone was you? I felt that no one else was going to do it. Judge Reeves studied her for a long moment. Mrs. Hendrickson, I'm going to sentence you to 120 hours of community service, to be completed at a senior center providing internet safety education. You'll also pay restitution to cover Madison's medical expenses and attend family counseling with your daughter and grandchildren. Your Honor, the prosecutor interjected, given the severity of the harassment campaign. The severity of the outcome, yes, Judge Reeves cut him off. But I'm also considering the complex family dynamics at play here. Mrs. Hendrickson, this is not absolution. This is an opportunity to make amends. Don't waste it. As they filed out of the courtroom, Jennifer caught up with Dolly in the hallway. Her daughter looked 10 years older than she had a month ago, her face drawn and her eyes holding a wariness that hadn't been there before. Mom, I need to talk to you. They found a quiet corner near the courthouse cafeteria, the smell of burned coffee and industrial disinfectant creating an appropriately grim atmosphere for what Jennifer clearly needed to say. Brian's filing for emergency custody, Jennifer said without preamble. Dolly felt the floor shift beneath her. What? He's arguing that I can't protect Madison from you, that as long as you're in our lives, she's not safe. Jennifer's voice was flat, emotionless. His lawyer is calling you a dangerous influence, pointing to Madison's suicide attempt as evidence of ongoing family trauma. That's ridiculous. Brian abandoned you all years ago. He has no right. He has every right. Jennifer's composure cracked. Madison nearly died, Mom. She swallowed 30 pills because she couldn't face going back to school, couldn't face the humiliation you helped create. Brian might be a selfish bastard, but he didn't try to destroy his own granddaughter. The words hit like physical blows. Dolly reached for the wall, steadying herself against the cold institutional tile. What are you saying? I'm saying I have to choose between you and my children, between protecting them from their father or protecting them from their grandmother. Jennifer's tears finally came, silent and devastating. And right now, you feel like the bigger threat. Jennifer, please. Tyler's agreed to testify for Brian in the custody hearing. The betrayal hit harder than the judge's sentence, harder than the criminal charges, harder than anything Dolly had experienced since Harold's death. Tyler? He says someone needs to speak for Madison, since she won't speak for herself. He says someone needs to tell the truth about what really happened that night, about why Madison felt like ending her life was her only option. Dolly closed her eyes, seeing Tyler's face that terrible evening, the disappointment, the moral clarity that had cut through all her justifications like a blade. He's not wrong, she whispered. No, he's not. Jennifer wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Mom, I love you, but I can't trust you around my children anymore. I can't risk another family dinner turning into a reason for one of them to want to die. They stood in silence for several minutes, the courthouse bustling around them with its daily parade of broken families and shattered lives. What about Marcus? Jennifer asked finally. Dolly had been dreading this question. Marcus had visited her once since Madison's hospitalization, sitting awkwardly in her living room while she tried to explain, to justify, to make him understand. He'd listened with the patience of a saint and the distance of a stranger. Marcus says he needs time to think about whether he can be with someone capable of what I did. Dolly's voice was barely audible. He says he doesn't recognize the woman he thought he was falling in love with. Do you? Do I what? Recognize yourself? Dolly looked around the courthouse lobby, at the families arguing in hushed tones, the lawyers checking their phones, the security guards who'd seen it all before. She thought about the woman who'd sat in this same building 30 years ago when Jennifer had gotten her first speeding ticket, indignant and protective, ready to argue with any authority figure who dared criticize her child. No, she said finally. I don't recognize myself at all. That evening, Dolly sat alone in her kitchen, staring at the laptop that had started it all. Marcus's patient tutorials seemed like another lifetime now. His gentle explanations of privacy settings and anonymous accounts, his assumption that she wanted to connect rather than destroy. On the screen was an email from the Maple Grove Senior Center confirming her community service assignment. Internet safety for seniors, teaching people her own age how to avoid the digital pitfalls that had once seemed so foreign and now felt as familiar as breathing. The irony wasn't lost on her. She would spend the next 120 hours teaching elderly people how to protect themselves online, while her own family needed protection from her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Grandma, I'm sorry about tomorrow. I don't want to hurt you, but someone has to speak for Madison." Dolly stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "You're doing the right thing. I'm proud of you." It was the truth. Tyler was doing what she should have done from the beginning, protecting Madison instead of punishing her. Being the adult instead of the victim. Choosing love over revenge. Outside her window, she could see Marcus's house, dark except for the blue glow of his television. He was probably watching the evening news, learning about other people's tragedies, while trying to forget about his own. Tomorrow, she would lose her grandchildren to their father's custody. Next week, she would begin teaching senior citizens about internet safety while her own granddaughter refused to use the internet at all. And someday, maybe, she would figure out how to live with what she'd done. But tonight, she would sit in her empty house and remember what it felt like to be a grandmother who protected instead of destroyed, who loved instead of retaliated, who built bridges instead of burning them, before it was too late to remember it all. 6 months later, the Maple Grove Senior Center's computer lab buzzed with the careful concentration of 12 elderly students learning to navigate the digital world. Dolly stood at the front of the room, watching Eleanor Martinez, 83 years old, successfully block her first spam caller on her smartphone. "Excellent work, Eleanor," Dolly said, her voice carrying the patience she'd learned through months of teaching people who reminded her, painfully, of herself 6 months ago. "Remember, you don't owe strangers your time or your trust, no matter how urgent they make their requests sound." The irony wasn't lost on her that she spent her days teaching vulnerable seniors to protect themselves from the very kind of manipulation Madison had practiced, and that she herself had weaponized. Mrs. Hendrickson, 80-year-old Robert, Chen, no relation to Madison's victim, though the name still made her pause, raised his hand tentatively. "My granddaughter wants to add me on something called Instagram. Is that safe?" "It can be, Robert, as long as you understand the privacy settings. And remember that anything you post can be seen by more people than you might expect." Dolly moved to his computer, helping him navigate the application's complex security options. The most important thing is to think before you share. Ask yourself, would I be comfortable with a stranger seeing this? Because on the internet, strangers often do. After class, Dolly gathered her materials slowly, using the extra time to steel herself for what came next. Today was Thursday, which meant family counseling with Dr. Rebecca Santos, the first session in 3 months that Madison had agreed to attend. The drive to Dr. Santos's office took her past Jefferson High School, where students were emerging from after-school activities. She found herself scanning the crowd for a familiar figure, though she knew Madison had transferred to an online program after the harassment made returning to school impossible. In the therapist's waiting room, Dolly sat across from Jennifer and Tyler, the distance between them feeling vast despite the small space. Madison emerged from Dr. Santos's inner office looking fragile but present in a way she hadn't been since the hospital. Her hair was shorter now, her clothes simpler, and she moved with the careful deliberation of someone rebuilding herself from the ground up. "Hello, Grandma," Madison said quietly, taking the chair furthest from Dolly. It was the first time Madison had spoken directly to her since the night of the suicide attempt. The words hit Dolly with unexpected force. "Hello, sweetheart." Dr. Santos, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying temples, settled into her chair with the practiced calm of someone who'd mediated countless family reconstructions. "Madison, you said you were ready to talk about what you've learned in your individual sessions. Would you like to start? Madison nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I learned that the men that the people I heard online, they were real people with real feelings. I knew that intellectually, but I didn't really understand it until... She paused, gathering strength. Until I experienced what it felt like to be on the other side. What do you mean by that? Dr. Santos prompted gently. I mean, I understood what it felt like to have strangers making judgments about you, posting things about you, deciding you deserved to be hurt. Madison's voice remained steady, though. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I still think what I did was wrong, but I also think what happened to me was wrong. She looked directly at Dolly for the first time. Grandma, I understand now why you were angry with me. I was cruel to you at dinner, and I was doing terrible things online, but the punishment didn't fit the crime. Dolly felt her chest tighten. Madison, let me finish, please. Madison's voice carried a new authority, hard-earned through months of therapy and reflection. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that dinner, about what I said to you. I was mean because I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that you'd see through me. Scared that if you really understood social media, you'd figure out what I was doing. Madison's composure cracked slightly. I attacked you because I was protecting myself, which doesn't make it right, but it makes it understandable. Jennifer reached for Madison's hand, but Madison gently pulled away. I need to say this. What I did to those men was wrong. What you did to me was also wrong. And what's been hardest to accept is that we both did it for similar reasons. We felt powerless, so we found ways to hurt people who seemed more vulnerable than us. The room fell silent, except for the soft tick of Dr. Santos's clock and the distant hum of traffic outside. Madison, Dolly said finally, I am so deeply sorry. Not just for what I did, but for not finding a better way to help you when I discovered what was happening. I know you are, and I forgive you. Madison's words were simple, but they carried the weight of genuine hard work behind them. But forgiveness doesn't mean trust. I'm not ready for that yet. What would help you get ready? Tyler asked quietly. Madison looked at her brother with something approaching a smile. Time, and seeing that Grandma can make different choices when she's angry or hurt. Dr. Santos leaned forward slightly. Dolly, Madison has shared some ideas about how you might work together moving forward. Would you like to hear them? Dolly nodded, not trusting her voice. Madison has been volunteering with a cyberbullying prevention program, Dr. Santos continued. She's been sharing her story, both as perpetrator and victim, with other teenagers. She thinks you might be valuable in helping teach adults about the real-world consequences of online harassment. You want me to work with you? Madison's smile was tentative but genuine. I want us to help other people avoid making our mistakes, both of them. 6 weeks later, Dolly stood beside Madison in the auditorium of Cedar Hills Community College, watching an audience of parents, teachers, and community leaders file in for their presentation. Digital Bridges and Burned Connections, a Family's Journey Through Online Harm. Madison had insisted on sharing the stage equally, though Dolly suspected her granddaughter was still the stronger speaker. There was something powerful about a teenager who could articulate both the thrill of deception and the devastation of exposure, who could speak to the humanity of both perpetrators and victims. Nervous? Madison asked, adjusting the microphone. Terrified, Dolly admitted, but hopeful too. They'd been working together for 6 weeks now, slowly rebuilding trust through shared purpose. Madison still lived with Brian during the week. Judge Reeves had ultimately granted him temporary custody, but spent weekends with Jennifer and Tyler. The arrangement wasn't perfect, but it was working. Marcus had started attending their presentations 3 weeks ago, sitting in the back row with the careful attention of someone trying to understand something that had once seemed incomprehensible. Last week, he'd helped Dolly practice her portion of the speech, offering gentle suggestions, while maintaining the careful distance that still defined their relationship. "Ladies and gentlemen," Madison said into the microphone, her voice clear and confident. "6 months ago, my grandmother and I nearly destroyed each other using the same tools that were supposed to help us connect. Tonight, we want to tell you how we learned to build bridges instead of burn them." Dolly stepped up to her own microphone, looking out at the audience of faces both familiar and strange. In the third row, she could see Jennifer and Tyler. In the back, Marcus offered an encouraging nod. "My name is Dolores Hendrickson," she began, "and I used the internet to try to destroy my granddaughter because I didn't know how to save her." The words she'd practiced came easily now, but more importantly, the understanding behind them felt genuine. She wasn't just performing redemption, she was living it, one presentation, one conversation, one small choice at a time. It wasn't forgiveness yet, and it might never be the family they'd once been, but it was something new, honest, careful, and built on the hard-won knowledge that love without wisdom could be just as destructive as hatred. And for the first time in 6 months, that felt like enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.